Bullies slapped a disabled girl in a restaurant, a 12-year-old with cerebral palsy. Her grandmother tried to protect her, and they shoved the old woman back into her seat. The manager? He told them to leave, but what those bullies didn't know was that this grandmother once saved a starving boy, a boy who grew into a man with a leather vest, 100 loyal riders, and a team of lawyers. He'd been waiting 38 years to repay a debt she refused to accept. And when that video went viral, he didn't just show up. He showed up with a plan. What happens when the most powerful family in town picks a fight with a woman they think has no one? And what's inside the shoebox that changes everything? Before we begin, drop a comment and let us know. Where are you watching from today? Every Saturday morning at 6:15, before the sun had fully cleared the tree line east of Cedar Falls, June Matheson stood at her granddaughter's bedroom door and listened for breathing. It was the same every week. The soft, uneven rhythm of Lily's sleep, the rustle of blankets twisted around legs that never quite cooperated even in rest. June would stand there for 10 seconds, sometimes 20, and let the sound settle something inside her chest. Then she'd knock twice, push open the door, and say the same thing she'd said for 12 years. "Good morning, sunshine. Pancake day." Lily Matheson was 12 years old, small for her age, and already smiling before her eyes were open. The cerebral palsy had claimed the left side hardest. Her hand trembled against the mattress as she pushed herself upright, and her speech carried a slur that thickened when she was tired. But mornings with June were safe. Mornings had a shape to them. June would sit on the edge of the bed and work the long braid, fingers moving through Lily's dark hair with a patience that made the act feel holy. Lily would hold still, not because she had to, but because she loved the gentle pull of it. "Extra whipped cream today?" Lily asked. "We'll see what Rosie's has to say about that." They always say yes. That's because you ask nice. The house was small, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a kitchen where every surface told the truth about their life. A stack of medical bills held down by a coffee mug. A fridge door covered in watercolor paintings, taped at the corners, each one signed in Lily's shaky hand. A budget notebook open to the current month, every dollar allocated in June's careful handwriting, $1,400 from Social Security, and not a cent more. The Saturday trip to Rosie's diner cost $11 with tip. It was their one luxury, and June had never missed it. She helped Lily into her forearm crutches, buttoned her coat, and checked the Velcro on her sneakers. Laces had been a 30-minute ordeal before they switched. Some battles weren't worth fighting. The drive took 7 minutes. Lily talked the entire way, about a painting she wanted to start, about a heron she'd seen from the school bus window, about whether pancakes were better with blueberries or chocolate chips. She was sharp and funny in ways that surprised people who heard the slur first and stopped listening. June never stopped listening. Rosie's diner sat on the corner of Main and 3rd, a flat-roofed building with checkered curtains and a neon sign that buzzed in the cold. Dale, the manager, waved them toward their usual booth, second from the window, left side. The vinyl was cracked and the table wobbled, but it was theirs. Every Saturday. Same booth, same order. The world outside could do whatever it wanted. In here, Lily got extra whipped cream and June got a second cup of coffee, and nobody looked at them like they were anything other than a grandmother and her girl having breakfast. They settled in. June tucked a napkin into Lily's collar. The pancakes arrived, golden and steaming, and Lily laughed at the tower of whipped cream. Then the front door banged open, and 3 teenagers dropped into the adjacent booth. The loudest one, tall, square-jawed, wearing sneakers that cost more than June's monthly grocery budget, threw himself into the seat and propped his feet on the opposite bench. His name was Bryce Keller, and he had never sat quietly anywhere in his life. Lily's fork paused. Her eyes flicked sideways. "Grandma," she whispered. "That boy keeps staring at me." June squeezed her hand under the table. "Eyes on your pancakes, sweetheart." Lily nodded and reached for her orange juice. Her left hand trembled around the glass, and the condensation made it slick against her fingers. The glass slipped. It wasn't dramatic. Lily's fingers simply couldn't hold what her mind told them to hold, the way they couldn't always grip a paintbrush or a zipper or the railing at school. The orange juice tilted, slid from her trembling hand, and shattered on the tile floor beside Bryce Keller's booth. Juice spread across the linoleum. A shard skittered under his $220 Nikes. Bryce looked down at the mess. Then he looked at Lily. Then he smiled the way boys smile when they've found something weaker than them. "Yo, did you see that?" He was already standing. His voice wasn't quiet. It was pitched for the room, for his friends, for the audience he always needed. He pulled out his phone and pointed it at Lily. "Say something. Say something so they can hear you." Lily's face went white. Her mouth opened but nothing came out, and that was worse because Bryce laughed and leaned closer. "What's the matter? Can't talk either." He mimicked her slur, a high, cruel exaggeration that made his friends bark with laughter. One of them had his phone out too, recording. "Spastic freak?" Lily had a syrup bottle in front of her, the sticky glass kind, and her trembling left hand was resting against it. Bryce reached across and slapped it from her grip. The bottle hit the edge of the table and broke, scattering glass and syrup across the booth. June was on her feet before the pieces stopped sliding. She was 71 years old and thin, but she stepped between her granddaughter and the boy with a steadiness that had nothing to do with size. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "You step back from her. Right now." Bryce didn't step back. He put his hand on June's shoulder and shoved her into the booth. The vinyl squeaked as she fell against it, her reading glasses swinging on their beaded chain. An older woman, pushed by a 17-year-old boy, and no one in the diner moved. "Control your retard," Bryce said. The diner went silent. Forks stopped. Cups paused halfway to lips. Every pair of eyes in the room found somewhere else to look. Dale appeared from behind the counter, wiping his hands on his mustard-stained polo. His face was slick with sweat, and his gaze bounced between Bryce and June the way a man's eyes move when he's calculating who can hurt him more. The Keller family's dealership sponsored the diner's Little League team. They bought catering for every lot event. June Matheson was a 71-year-old woman on Social Security. The math took him 2 seconds. "Mrs. Matheson, maybe it's best if you and Lily head on out, just to avoid any more trouble." June stared at him. "That boy assaulted my granddaughter. I want your security footage." Dale's eyes darted to the small black dome mounted in the ceiling corner, then back to June. He swallowed. "There's no camera in the dining room, ma'am. That one's been broken for months." It was a lie. June could see it in the way his jaw tightened, in the way he couldn't hold her gaze. But she was an old woman with a crying child, and no leverage, and a room full of people who had already decided she wasn't worth the risk. She gathered Lily against her side. The girl was shaking, tears cutting through the syrup on her cheek. June's arm wrapped around her shoulders, and together they walked through the silent diner, past the counter, past the door Dale held open for them as if he were doing them a kindness. In the parking lot, the cold hit them both. Lily buried her face against June's cardigan, and her sobs were the only sound. June held her. She held her the way she'd held her after every surgery, every cruel word at school. Every night Lily had asked why she didn't have a mom. "Listen to me." June's voice was steady, even as her own tears fell. "You are not what that boy called you. You are a Matheson, and Mathesons don't break." Lily nodded into her chest, and June carried that weight to the car the way she'd carried everything, alone. Back inside the diner, Bryce Keller dropped into his booth and high-fived his friend. The friend with the phone tapped 3 times and posted the video to TikTok with a laughing emoji caption. 40 minutes later and 160 miles east, in a trucking company office in Davenport, a heavy-set man in a cracked leather vest watched the video load on his phone. His name was Harlan Voss. People called him Duke. His knuckles went white around the device as the footage played. The shove, the slur, the old woman walking out with her head high and her granddaughter crumbling beside her. He watched it again. His eyes never left June's face. On the desk beside his phone sat a shoebox. Inside, visible through the open lid, lay dozens of returned checks, each one for $500, each one with the same handwriting on the back. "You don't owe us anything, Harlan." Duke set the phone down. He stared at the shoebox for a long time. Then he reached for his keys. The boy who showed up at the Matheson farmhouse door in January of 1986 was 14 years old, 6 inches shorter than he'd be at 20, and so thin his collarbone cast shadows. His name was Harlan Voss. He had a black eye going yellow at the edges, a split lip that had scabbed crooked, and no coat. The temperature was 11 degrees. He'd walked 4 miles from his foster placement, a house where the man drank 4 roses and used his hands when the bottle ran out. Harlan had taken it for 7 months because the caseworker said it was his last chance. That night, the man had swung a belt buckle instead of an open palm, and Harlan decided last chances could go to hell. He didn't know the Mathesons. He knew their porch light was on, and that meant someone was home, and at 14 with no coat in an Iowa winter, a porch light was enough. June Matheson was 28 years old then. She opened the door in a flannel robe with her hair down, took one look at the bruised, shivering boy on her steps, and pulled him inside without a single question. Not, "Who are you?" Not, "Where did you come from?" Not, "What happened?" She sat him at the kitchen table and put a plate in front of him. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans from a can. He ate so fast he bit his tongue and didn't stop. She set a second plate down before he finished the first. Roy Matheson came in from the garage, grease on his hands and the Iron Oaks MC patch on his vest, and took in the scene without a word. He was a broad-shouldered mechanic with calloused hands and a quiet voice, and he had a way of reading a room that made talking unnecessary. He looked at the boy. He looked at the bruises. He pulled out a chair and sat down across from him. "You eat," Roy said. "We'll figure the rest out later." They figured it out by letting him stay. There was a room down the hall that had belonged to June's younger brother before he enlisted. It had a twin bed with a quilt June's mother had sewn and a window that looked out over the back field. They put Harlan in that bed and he slept for 14 hours. When he woke up, June had washed his clothes and Roy had set a pair of work boots by the door. That winter became a season with a shape to it. Roy took Harlan into the garage and taught him engines, how to rebuild a carburetor, how to listen for a misfire, how to keep his hands steady when the wrench slipped. He taught him to ride a motorcycle in the frozen back field, the Harley coughing and sliding on packed snow, while Harlan gripped the handlebars so hard his knuckles ached for days. June taught him other things. How to sit at a table and use a napkin. How to say "thank you" without it feeling like surrender. How kindness didn't come with a bill attached. Harlan tested them. He tested them the way any kid tests the walls of a place he doesn't trust yet. Sullen silences, slammed doors. A night he disappeared for 6 hours and came back expecting to find his bags packed on the porch. Instead, he found June at the kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee, one pushed to the empty chair across from her. She didn't ask where he'd been. She just said, "You're home. Drink your coffee." By spring, the county placed Harlan with a better family 2 towns over. Good people, decent house. But on the morning he left, Roy walked him to the truck and pressed something into his hand. A leather patch, the Iron Oaks insignia, stitched and worn. "You've got people now," Roy said. "Don't forget that." Harlan didn't forget. He grew into the name Duke the way a tree grows into a fence, slowly, then all at once, until the two couldn't be separated. He built a trucking company out of one used rig in 20-hour days. He joined the Iron Oaks, rose to sergeant-at-arms, then vice president, then president after Roy stepped down. And every month, from the first month he could afford it, he mailed June Matheson a check for $500. She returned every one. The handwriting on the back never changed. "You don't owe us anything, Harlan." He kept every returned check. He bought a shoebox for them, and when that filled up, he bought another. 30 years of refusal, filed in cardboard on his desk beside a framed photo of Roy Matheson standing next to a Harley, grinning, one hand on the shoulder of a skinny kid in an oversized leather vest. Roy died 6 years before the video. Cancer took him in the same quiet way he'd done everything else. No drama, no speeches, just a hand on June's and a long exhale. Duke was at the bedside. He'd driven through the night from Davenport without stopping. Roy looked at him one last time and said, "Look after her." Duke had tried. Lord, he had tried. But June wouldn't take the checks, wouldn't take the help, wouldn't take anything that might turn what she'd given him into a transaction. She was the most stubborn woman he'd ever known, and he loved her for it, and it drove him half crazy. Now he sat in his office in Davenport, the phone dark on his desk, the video burned into his memory. He opened the shoebox and looked at 30 years of returned kindness. Check after check after check, each one a promise she wouldn't let him keep. He closed the lid. He picked up his keys and his phone. He called the Iron Oaks chapter president in Cedar Rapids, then the one in Iowa City. The conversations were short. "It's June," he said. "Roy's June. They need us." That was all it took. Monday morning, 2 days after the incident, June's neighbor Linda knocked on the screen door holding a tablet like it was something contagious. "June, you need to see this." The video had 500,000 views. 500,000 strangers had watched a 17-year-old boy shove June into a booth and call her granddaughter a word that made June's stomach clench every time she replayed it. The comments were a war, outrage and cruelty in equal measure, strangers arguing about a moment that had lasted 40 seconds in a diner that most of them would never visit. June handed the tablet back and said nothing. She thought, for a brief and foolish moment, that the attention might help. That someone with authority would see the video and do what Dale had refused to do. That the truth, now visible to 500,000 people, might matter. She was wrong. By 10 o'clock that morning, Doug Keller was already on the phone. Doug Keller was 54 years old, fit in a way that required a gym membership and a golf tan, with capped teeth and a $400 haircut he drove to Des Moines to get. He wore a Rolex Submariner and monogrammed cuffs, and every detail of his appearance was engineered to communicate that he was the most important person in whatever room he entered. He owned Keller Auto, the largest dealership in the county. He sat on the city council. His office wall displayed framed photos with the mayor, the police chief, and 2 state legislators. The youth sports complex bore his family's name. The Police Benevolent Fund cashed his checks every quarter. Doug Keller did not yell. He made phone calls. The first call went to Dale. "You told her there was no camera. That stays the story. Are we clear?" Dale said they were clear. The second call went to a school board member who owed him a favor. "The incident," Doug explained, "was a private matter between teenagers that had been exaggerated online. It had nothing to do with the school district." The board member agreed. The third call went to his attorney. Within 2 hours, a cease and desist letter was drafted, printed on heavyweight legal stationery, and sent to June Matheson's address by certified mail. The letter warned her against making defamatory public statements regarding a minor and threatened a civil suit if she continued. Doug leaned back in his leather chair and studied the letter's language. He felt nothing. This was maintenance, not anger. The same administrative efficiency he applied to a warranty dispute or a zoning request. June Matheson was a 71-year-old woman on Social Security. She had no lawyer, no resources, no connections. She registered, on every metric that mattered to Doug Keller, as 0. He picked up his phone and called his attorney one more time. "She's a 71-year-old woman on Social Security. This goes away by Friday." June received the letter that afternoon. She sat at the kitchen table and read it twice, her weathered hands trembling against the heavy paper. She didn't fully understand the legal language, but she understood the threat. If she talked, they would sue her. If she fought, they would bury her. She couldn't afford an attorney. She couldn't afford to miss a single Social Security payment. She set the letter down and pressed her palms flat against the table to stop them shaking. Behind her, the kitchen door opened and Lily swung in on her crutches, a sheet of paper held carefully against her chest. "Grandma, look." It was a watercolor. A field of sunflowers under a blue sky, the petals rendered in soft, trembling strokes that caught the light in a way no steady hand could replicate. Lily held it out with her good hand, her face bright and expectant. June took the painting. She looked at it for a long time. Then she stood, pulled a magnet from the fridge, and pinned it beside the others. She turned back to Lily and smiled. It was the hardest thing she'd done all day. Wednesday morning, Lily rolled through the front doors of Cedar Falls Middle School, with her crutches clicking on the linoleum and her braid tight against her back, and she knew before she reached her locker that everything had changed. The video had spread the way things spread among 12 and 13-year-olds. Not through TikTok itself, which most of them weren't supposed to have, but through screenshots and whispers and the particular cruelty of kids who smell weakness the way animals smell blood. 2 boys she didn't know walked behind her in the hallway and mimicked her gait, the uneven drag of the left leg, the lean into the crutch. They exaggerated it until it was a performance, and the laughter that followed traveled the length of the corridor like a wave. A teacher stood at her classroom door and watched. She looked at the boys. She looked at Lily. She looked away. At lunch, the cafeteria table where Lily usually sat with a girl named Haley was empty. Haley was across the room with a different group, eyes down, not looking. Lily found out later, though not from Haley, that Haley's parents had told her to stay away. The Keller family was involved, and the Kellers were not people you crossed in Cedar Falls. Lily sat alone. She ate half a sandwich, drank her milk, and stared at a spot on the table that someone had carved with a pen. She repeated her grandmother's words in her head like a prayer. Mathesons don't break. Mathesons don't break. In the accessible bathroom stall after lunch, she broke. She cried with her hand over her mouth so no one could hear, the way she'd learned to cry at school. Silent, efficient, finished in 3 minutes. She wiped her face with rough paper towels and stared at herself in the mirror until her eyes stopped being red. Then she picked up her crutches and went to 6th period. Dr. Haynes, the principal, spent Wednesday in his office with the door closed. His walls displayed photos of the school's new athletic facility, the Keller Family Athletic Center, paid for by a foundation grant that Doug Keller personally approved. Beside the photos hung a framed Educator of the Year award from 4 years ago. He had received June's voicemail about the bullying. He filed it under peer conflict and flagged it for review at the next staff meeting, 3 weeks away. Lily's last class was art. Ms. Rowan was waiting. She was early 30s, warm-faced, with paint under her fingernails and a scarf tied in her dark curly hair. Her classroom was the most cluttered room in the school, every wall covered in student work, jars of brushes on every surface, the permanent smell of turpentine and acrylic. She didn't mention the video. She didn't mention the hallway. She simply sat next to Lily and looked at her latest watercolor, a rendering of morning light through a kitchen window that was, by any honest measure, extraordinary. Ms. Rowan studied it for a long time. "Lily, do you know how rare it is to paint light like this?" She reached into her desk and pulled out a package, high-quality watercolor paper, the kind that cost more than Lily had ever used. "Don't you dare let anyone take this from you." Lily held the paper against her chest and nodded. She didn't trust her voice. She walked out of school that afternoon to June's waiting car. She got in, buckled her seatbelt, and stared straight ahead. She didn't say a word. June looked at her granddaughter's face. The red-rimmed eyes, the tight jaw, the careful blankness that children learn when they're trying to protect the people who love them. And her hands tightened on the steering wheel until her knuckles went white. Thursday night, after Lily was asleep, June sat alone at the kitchen table with a pen and a legal pad and wrote a formal complaint to the Cedar Falls School Board. She wrote slowly. Her handwriting was careful and precise, the letters small and even, the way she did everything, with a discipline that hid the effort it cost. She described the hallway incident. She named the boys. She described the teacher who looked away. She described Dr. Haynes's silence. She asked in plain language what the school intended to do to protect her granddaughter. She signed it, sealed it, and drove it to the district office Friday morning before Lily woke up. By Friday afternoon, the response arrived by email, a form letter on district letterhead. The matter has been reviewed and does not meet the threshold for formal disciplinary action at this time. The district is committed to a safe and inclusive learning environment for all students. June read it twice. She set her reading glasses on the table. What she didn't know, what she wouldn't learn until much later, was that Doug Keller had called a school board member at 8 that morning. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. The form response was drafted by noon, but Doug wasn't finished. On Friday afternoon, while June was reading the school board's dismissal, Doug Keller sat in his attorney's office and signed a petition to the Bremer County Family Court. The petition argued that June Matheson, age 71, was too elderly and financially unstable to serve as legal guardian of a disabled minor. It cited her age, her income of $1,400 per month, and the unstable home environment evidenced by, and this was the phrase that would keep June awake for days, repeated public altercations involving the child. The petition was filed through Judge Robert Allen, a family court judge who had attended Doug Keller's Christmas party for the last 8 years and whose wife drove a Keller Auto Cadillac at cost. The certified letter arrived Saturday morning, 1 week to the day since Lily's orange juice had slipped from her trembling hand onto the floor of Rosie's diner. June signed for it at the door. She carried it to the kitchen table. She opened it with a butter knife because her hands were shaking too badly to tear the envelope. She read it once, then again. The words blurred. They wanted to take Lily. The kitchen was quiet. The fridge hummed. Lily's watercolors hung in their rows. The sunflowers, the heron, the morning light through the window. Roy's chair sat empty across the table, the way it had sat empty for 6 years. June looked at that chair. They want to take her from me, Roy. Her voice broke on his name. It was the first time it had broken. Through the slur, through the shove, through the lie about the camera, through the legal letter, through every night she'd cried alone in this kitchen after Lily went to bed. She had held and held and held. She couldn't hold anymore. June Matheson put her head in her hands and wept. Not quietly, not efficiently, the way Lily had learned to cry in bathroom stalls. This was the sound of a woman who had carried everything alone for 12 years and had just been told it wasn't enough. The house was silent except for her sobs and the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the kitchen clock that Roy had hung the year they moved in. This was the lowest point. This was the bottom. But 160 miles east, in a Davenport trucking office, a man in a cracked leather vest was looking at a shoebox full of returned checks and reaching for his keys. And the bottom, as June Matheson was about to learn, was not the end. 160 miles east of June Matheson's kitchen table, in a cinderblock clubhouse on the outskirts of Davenport, Iowa, Duke stood before 63 men and women in leather vests and pressed play. The video filled the wall-mounted screen. The diner, the boy, the slur, the shove, the old woman walking out with her granddaughter shaking against her side. Nobody spoke. The room was iron oaks. Veterans, mechanics, truckers, nurses, a few who'd done time and a few who'd built businesses, all of them bound by a patch that a broad-shouldered mechanic named Roy Matheson had stitched by hand in 1979. They watched the video in the kind of silence that has weight to it, the kind you can feel in your chest. Duke let it play twice. Then he turned off the screen. "That woman," he said, "is June Matheson, Roy's wife." The room shifted. Chairs creaked. A few of the older riders, the ones who'd known Roy, who'd ridden with him, who'd carried his casket, leaned forward. Duke wasn't a man who talked much. He spoke slowly, chose his words the way a carpenter chooses nails, and people listened because they knew nothing was wasted. He told the story from the beginning. The winter of 1986, the porch light, the plate of meatloaf, the boy who had nowhere to go, and the woman who pulled him inside without asking why. He told them about Roy teaching him to ride in a frozen backfield, about June teaching him that kindness wasn't a transaction. He told them about the checks. $500 a month, every month, for over 30 years. Then he reached into the shoebox on the table beside him and held up a single check. He turned it over so the room could see the handwriting on the back. "You don't owe us anything, Harlan." His voice cracked on the name. "She wrote that on every single one. I've got 30 years of them in this box." He set the check down. "Roy Matheson fed me when I was nothing. His wife is being destroyed for raising a little girl the way she raised me. We ride today." The vote was unanimous. It took 4 seconds. But Duke hadn't waited for the vote. He'd spent the entire week preparing since the video hit his phone the previous Saturday. This wasn't muscle. This was strategy. 3 Iron Oaks members, Frank DeLuca, Maria Santos, and Cal Briggs, were former JAG military attorneys who now did pro bono civil rights work through the club's legal fund. Duke had them on the phone by Sunday morning. By Tuesday, they'd pulled the insurance filing for Rosie's Diner and confirmed the make and model of the security camera system Dale had lied about. By Wednesday, they'd drafted a federal civil rights complaint under the ADA, a criminal referral for assault on a minor, and an elder abuse charge. By Thursday, a nationally known disability rights attorney named Sarah Chen, who had seen the viral video at 3 million views and called Duke directly, had agreed to take June's case pro bono. By Friday, the counter-motion to dismiss the custody petition was drafted, along with a judicial ethics complaint against Judge Robert Allen. Duke had done all of this without telling June. She would have refused. She would have returned it all, the way she returned the checks, because that was who she was. But Duke was done letting her carry this alone. He looked at the room. 63 riders looked back. "Gear up." The clubhouse emptied. Engines coughed and caught, one after another, until the parking lot shook with the sound of 200 motorcycles. Riders from 3 chapters across Iowa, called in over the week. Duke pulled his helmet on and swung onto his Harley. Roy's original patch sat faded and cracked on his breast, right over his heart. The formation pulled out of the lot and turned west toward Cedar Falls. That same Saturday morning, June made scrambled eggs and toast and set the plate in front of Lily as if the world hadn't sent a certified letter trying to take her away. She hadn't told Lily about the custody petition. She hadn't told anyone. The letter sat in the drawer beneath the dish towels, folded once, hidden the way June hid everything that might break the careful architecture of their life. Lily didn't need to know that a man with a Rolex and a connected judge thought 71 was too old, and $1,400 a month was too little, and a girl with cerebral palsy deserved a different home. Lily needed scrambled eggs and a Saturday morning, and her grandmother acting like the ground was solid. So June acted. After breakfast, Lily settled at the kitchen table with her watercolors. Ms. Rowan's paper was spread before her. Heavier, smoother than anything she'd used, the kind of paper that held the water instead of buckling under it. Lily dipped her brush and began. June washed the dishes and watched. Lily's left hand trembled the way it always trembled. The brush shook as it touched the paper, and the pigment spread in soft, uneven bleeds that should have been mistakes. But they weren't mistakes. Under Lily's hand, the tremor became texture. Light diffused through clouds, the blur of wind across a wheat field, a golden glow breaking through gray that looked like something you could step into and feel warm. She was painting a storm clearing, and it was the most beautiful thing June had ever seen her make. June dried her hands on the dish towel and sat down across from her. She watched her granddaughter's face, the concentration, the way her tongue pressed against her lower lip, the absolute stillness in her brown eyes, even as her hand shook. This was where Lily was whole. This was where the tremor wasn't a limitation, but a language. "Tell me about Grandpa Roy," Lily said, not looking up from the painting. June smiled. She told the story she always told, how Roy could fix any engine but couldn't boil water, how he'd talk to his motorcycle like it was a dog, how he believed everybody deserved a second chance even when they probably didn't. "Grandma?" Lily's brush paused. "Why are people cruel?" June was quiet for a moment. "Because they're scared, mostly. Scared people do ugly things. Was Grandpa Roy ever scared? Every day of his life. He just didn't let it make him ugly. Lily nodded and went back to painting. The kitchen was quiet except for the brush on paper and the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of Roy's clock on the wall. The phone rang. June answered it in the hallway. It was Ms. Rowan. She was calling on a Saturday, calling to check on Lily, to ask how she was holding up, to say she'd been thinking about Lily's work all week. Then she said something that made June lean against the wall and close her eyes. "Mrs. Matheson, I have a friend who owns a gallery. I want to show her Lily's paintings. They're not just good, they're extraordinary." June's voice cracked when she said, "Thank you." She hung up and stood in the hallway with her hand pressed against her chest, breathing. She walked back into the kitchen. Lily was still painting. "Grandma, do you think beautiful things can come from shaking hands?" June sat down. She looked at the storm clearing on the paper, at the golden light her granddaughter had made from trembling and water and pigment and will. "Baby, the most beautiful things I've ever seen came from yours." Lily smiled. It was the first real smile June had seen from her all week. June made a decision. She walked to the phone in the hallway, looked up the one free legal aid number she could find in the county directory, and dialed. She left a voicemail. Her voice was steady. She gave her name, her situation, and her phone number, and she said, "I need help. I can't pay, but I'll fight with whatever I have." She hung up and went back to the kitchen. The doorbell rang. June wiped her hands on her cardigan and walked to the front door. She opened it. Duke stood on her porch. His helmet was in his hand. His eyes were red. Behind him, the street was lined with motorcycles as far as she could see. June stared at him. She hadn't seen Harlan Voss in 2 years, not since Roy's memorial ride, when Duke had stood at the back of the formation and wept without making a sound. But his checks had kept arriving every month like clockwork, and she had kept returning them with the same 6 words on the back, and that silent exchange had been the shape of their relationship for longer than most marriages last. He was older. His beard had gone more salt than pepper, and the lines around his eyes had deepened. But he stood the same way he always had, still solid, taking up space without demanding it. Roy's original patch was faded on his vest, right over his heart. "Miss June?" His voice broke. "I saw the video. We all saw it." June looked past him. The street was full of motorcycles. Not a dozen, not 20. Rows and rows of them, chrome catching the Saturday morning light. Riders standing beside their bikes in leather vests with the Iron Oaks insignia. Some she recognized, men and women who had known Roy, who had ridden with him, who had come to the funeral. Most she didn't. But they were all there, and they were all looking at her. Her hand went to her mouth. "Harlan." It was all she could say. Duke stepped inside. He was gentle about it. The way a big man learns to be gentle in small spaces. The way he'd learned in this very house 38 years ago. He looked around the kitchen. He saw Roy's empty chair. He saw the watercolors on the fridge. He saw the certified letter on the counter. June had pulled it from the drawer that morning to read again, and she hadn't put it back. He picked it up. He read it. His jaw tightened so hard June could hear his teeth. "They filed a custody petition," he said. It wasn't a question. "Monday," June whispered. "I have to appear Monday." Duke set the letter down. He looked at her with those deep-set eyes, and for a moment he was 14 again, standing in her kitchen with a black eye and no coat, and she was the woman who'd pulled him inside. "Not alone, you don't." Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway, her crutches clicking on the linoleum. She looked at Duke, this large bearded stranger standing in her grandmother's kitchen, and her hand tightened on the crutch grip. Duke knelt. He went all the way down to her level, slowly, the way you approach something small and wary. He looked at her face and saw June's brown eyes looking back at him. "You must be Lily." His voice was soft. "My name's Harlan. Your Grandpa Roy was the best man I ever knew." Lily studied him for a long moment. "You're the one who sends the checks." Duke looked at June. June looked at the ceiling. "She reads the mail," June said. Duke laughed. A real laugh, the first one in a week. And Lily smiled, and something in the room shifted. He sat June down and explained what was coming. The JAG attorneys had prepared everything. The disability rights lawyer was driving in from Chicago. They knew about Dale's lie, knew the camera model from the insurance filing, had the subpoena ready. The custody petition would be challenged with a counter-motion and a judicial ethics complaint. Doug Keller was about to discover what it felt like to be outmatched by people who didn't announce themselves with Rolexes. But first, Duke said, they were going to Rosie's diner. June shook her head. "I'm not going back there." "Yes, you are." Duke's voice was quiet and steady. "Roy would want you to walk back into that diner with your head up, and you're not walking in alone." June looked at him. She looked at Lily. She looked at Roy's empty chair. She got her cardigan. The convoy rolled through Cedar Falls in formation, the rumble of 200 Harleys shaking storefront windows down Main Street, turning every head on the sidewalk. June rode in the passenger seat of Duke's truck, Lily beside her, watching the motorcycles through the window with her mouth open. They parked in formation around Rosie's diner, filling the lot and spilling onto the street. Duke opened the door for June and Lily. They walked in together. Dale was behind the counter. His face went white. His hands stopped moving on the rag he was holding, and his eyes went from Duke's vest to June's face to the wall of leather behind them. Duke walked to the counter. He was calm. He was measured. Every word carried weight. "Table for 3, please, and you might want to call your lawyer." June and Lily sat in their booth. Second from the window, left side. The vinyl was still cracked. The table still wobbled. But this time, the diner filled behind them. Riders taking every table, every stool, every inch of standing room, until Rosie's was packed with Iron Oak's leather and the sound of 200 people ordering coffee. Dale's hands shook as he picked up the phone. 10 minutes later, a black Cadillac Escalade pulled into the lot. Doug Keller stepped out, Bryce behind him, and stared at the wall of motorcycles surrounding the building. He had been summoned, and he had no idea what he was walking into. Doug Keller pushed through the door of Rosie's diner the way he pushed through every door. Shoulders first, chin up, expecting the room to rearrange itself around him. Bryce trailed 2 steps behind, wearing the same expression his father wore, the one that said this was an inconvenience and someone was going to pay for it. Then Doug saw the leather vests, and he stopped. They were everywhere. Every booth, every stool, every square foot of standing room was filled with men and women in faded Iron Oak's cuts, and every one of them was looking at him. The diner that had been silent a week ago, silent while his son shoved an old woman and called a 12-year-old girl a word that should never leave a human mouth, was silent again. But the weight of this silence was different. Duke stood up from June's booth. He didn't rush. He didn't raise his voice. He simply rose to his full height, broad-shouldered, heavy, still, and the room contracted around him. "Doug Keller," Duke said. Not a question. A confirmation. Doug's eyes moved fast. He was calculating. Net worth, legal resources, institutional connections. It was the only math he knew. "I don't know who you are, but if you think a bunch of bikers are going to intimidate..." "We're not here to intimidate you, Mr. Keller." 3 people stepped forward from the back of the diner. 2 men and a woman, all in Iron Oak's vests, all carrying manila folders. Frank DeLuca, Maria Santos, Cal Briggs, former JAG military attorneys. They didn't look like bikers. They looked like what they were, lawyers who happened to ride. Frank spoke first, his voice measured and precise. "Mr. Keller, you are being served with a federal civil rights complaint under the Americans with Disabilities Act. A criminal referral for assault on a minor, an elder abuse charge stemming from the physical assault on June Matheson, and a counter motion to dismiss your custody petition, accompanied by a judicial ethics complaint against Judge Robert Allen." He placed the folder in Doug's hands. Doug took it by reflex. His face cycled through confusion, recognition, and something he hadn't felt in a very long time: fear. Maria Santos turned to Dale, who was standing behind the counter with the color draining from his face like water from a cracked glass. She placed a second folder on the counter. "Mr. Dale, this is a subpoena for the security footage from your dining room camera system. A Lorex 4K, 8-channel, installed 14 months ago per your commercial insurance filing with Grinnell Mutual." She paused. "The camera you told Mrs. Matheson didn't exist." Dale looked at the subpoena. He looked at June. His mouth opened and nothing came out. The diner was silent. Every phone in the room was recording. Duke stepped into the center of the room. He didn't look at Doug. He looked at the people. The waitress, the regulars, the faces that had been here a week ago and hadn't moved. "I want to tell you something about the woman sitting in that booth." He reached into his vest and pulled out a check. Creased, worn, $500. He turned it over so the room could see the handwriting on the back. 38 years ago, this woman fed a broken boy when nobody else would look at him. She didn't ask his name first. She didn't ask what he could give her. She set a plate in front of him and pulled up a chair. Duke's voice was steady, but his eyes were wet. "That boy was me, and the man who sat beside her, Roy Matheson, who founded this club, taught me that you don't look away when the people you love are being destroyed." He looked at Doug Keller. "You thought she had no one. You were wrong." The silence held. Doug's face was gray. Bryce, standing behind his father, watched something he had never seen before. His father shrinking, the square shoulders curving inward, the Rolex hand tightening into a fist that had nothing to hit. Then Dale broke. It wasn't dramatic. It was small and shaking, the way real accountability usually is. He stepped out from behind the counter, his orthopedic shoes squeaking on the linoleum, and walked to June's booth. Tears ran down his doughy face. "I was a coward, Mrs. Matheson." His voice cracked. "I lied about that camera. I asked you to leave when I should have. He couldn't finish. "I'm sorry." June looked up at him. She didn't say it was all right, because it wasn't, but she nodded once with the same even respect she gave everyone, and Dale stepped back, gutted and grateful. Doug Keller left without a word. He walked through the door with his shoulders drawn in and his son trailing behind him, and neither of them looked back. June sat in her booth, second from the window, left side. Lily was pressed against her side, and all around them, the riders of the Iron Oaks were ordering coffee and pancakes and filling the room with the low hum of conversation. And for the first time in a week, June Matheson was not alone. The confrontation at Rosie's Diner was filmed by 11 different phones. By Saturday night, 3 versions were on TikTok, 2 on YouTube, and 1 on the local CBS affiliate's website. By Sunday, national outlets picked it up. By Monday, the combined views crossed 11 million, and the dominoes began to fall. The first call came Tuesday morning. Doug Keller was at his desk, a cup of coffee going cold beside a stack of messages he hadn't returned, when his assistant put through a call from the Ford Motor Company regional vice president. The conversation lasted 90 seconds. "Mr. Keller, we don't associate our brand with what that video showed. Effective immediately. Your franchise agreement is under review. We'll be in contact through legal channels." The line went dead. Doug stared at the phone. His hand gripped the edge of the desk until his knuckles turned white. The second call came an hour later, First National Bank of Cedar Falls, pulling their floor plan. Financing. The third came after lunch, the Iowa Auto Dealers Association, suspending his membership pending investigation. By Wednesday, 3 regional banks had followed. The dealership lot, usually full, began to thin as customers quietly took their business to the Chevy dealer in Waterloo. The custody petition collapsed faster than Doug could have imagined. The judicial ethics complaint against Judge Allen triggered an expedited federal review, and Judge Allen, who had attended Doug's Christmas party for 8 years and whose wife drove a Keller Cadillac at cost, withdrew the petition voluntarily on Tuesday afternoon to save his own career. The emergency motion to dismiss was granted Wednesday morning. By the time June's pro bono attorney called to tell her, it was already over. "They can't take her?" June's voice was barely a whisper. "No, ma'am." "It's done." June hung up the phone and pressed both hands flat against the kitchen counter and stood there, breathing, for a full minute. At Cedar Falls Middle School, Principal Dr. Haynes was placed on administrative leave Thursday afternoon. The school board, suddenly eager to demonstrate accountability now that cameras were watching, announced a formal review of the bullying complaints he had buried. His wire-rimmed glasses and his Educator of the Year award and his practiced, reassuring tone could not protect him from 11 million people who had watched a 12-year-old girl be humiliated in his hallways while he filed it under peer conflict. Dale kept Rosie's diner. But the weight of his cowardice was public now, stitched into the town's memory. Regulars who had sat in their booths and said nothing a week ago now avoided his eyes when they came in for coffee. It was a small punishment. It was the right size. Ms. Rowan, watching the national coverage from her cluttered, paint-stained classroom, picked up her phone and called her college friend, Carmen Avila. "Carmen, I need you to come see something. There's a student. Her name is Lily. You need to see her paintings." And in a bedroom in the largest house in Cedar Falls, Bryce Keller sat alone. His father was downstairs on the phone, his voice tight and unfamiliar. Not commanding, not cold, but panicked. Bryce had never heard that voice before. The friends who had laughed with him at the diner weren't returning his texts. The TikTok video, his video, the one his friend had posted with a laughing caption, had become the most watched thing in the state. Bryce opened the video on his phone. He'd watched it before. Dozens of times, in fact, but always watching Lily, watching the glass break, watching the moment he'd felt powerful. This time, he watched June. He watched the old woman he'd shoved flinch as his hand hit her shoulder. He watched her reading glasses swing on their beaded chain. He watched her gather her granddaughter against her side and walk out of the diner with her back straight and her chin up, holding a sobbing child with a dignity that he, at 17, did not possess and might never possess. He sat with that for a long time. No dramatic epiphany, no tears. Just the first crack in something that had been solid his entire life, the certainty that people like him didn't face consequences and people like June didn't matter. That evening, June sat on her front porch with Roy's leather vest draped across her lap. The sunset was gold and pink over the Cedar Falls rooftops, and the street was quiet, and for the first time in weeks, the weight in her chest had eased enough to let her breathe. She ran her fingers over the worn leather, over the iron oaks patch Roy had stitched by hand, and she breathed. 3 weeks after the reckoning at Rosie's diner, Duke pulled into June's driveway in his truck, climbed the porch steps, and knocked the way he always knocked. 2 slow knocks, spaced apart, the way Roy used to. June opened the door and looked at him. He was carrying a shoebox in one hand and a manila folder in the other, and the expression on his face was something between nervous and determined, like a man about to ask a question he's been rehearsing for 30 years. "Come in, Harlan." They sat at the kitchen table. Roy's chair was empty between them, the way it always was. Lily was at school, her first full week back without incident, now that Dr. Haynes was gone and the hallways had gone quiet in the particular way hallways go quiet when the whole town is watching. Duke opened the manila folder and slid the papers across the table. "This is the charter for the Roy and June Matheson Foundation." June put on her reading glasses and looked at the first page. Her lips moved as she read. Adaptive equipment, therapy scholarships, legal advocacy for disabled children in rural Iowa. Kids like Lily, whose families couldn't afford to fight. The seed money is $250,000, Duke said. 100 from the Iron Oaks chapters. They voted on it unanimous. Every chapter. 90 from a GoFundMe that went up after the video. And 60 from me. June looked up. "Harlan, that's too much." "It's not enough, but it's a start." He paused. "Your mortgage is paid off too. That was separate. That was me." June opened her mouth to protest, and Duke held up his hand. "Before you say a word, I need to show you something." He set the shoebox on the table. The same shoebox from his office, battered cardboard, worn at the corners, held shut with a rubber band. He pulled the rubber band off and lifted the lid. Inside, packed tight and filed by date, were checks. Dozens of them. Hundreds. $500 each. Mailed monthly. Returned monthly. Every single one with the same handwriting on the back. Duke pulled one from the top and turned it over. "You don't owe us anything, Harlan." He pulled another. "You don't owe us anything, Harlan." Another. "You don't owe us anything, Harlan." His voice was thick. 30 years, Miss June. I kept every one." June stared at the shoebox. She reached in and picked up a check from the bottom. The first one, yellowed and soft at the creases. She turned it over and saw her own handwriting, younger and sharper, the same 6 words she'd written when she was 41 years old, and Harlan Voss was a 22-year-old kid with a new trucking rig and a debt he wouldn't let go of. Her chin trembled. Her eyes filled. "You kept them all. Everyone." Duke's eyes were red. "Because you were wrong, Miss June. I do owe you. I owe you everything, and you wouldn't let me pay it back. So I'm not paying it back." He tapped the foundation papers. "I'm paying it forward. Roy fed 1 kid and changed a life. Imagine what happens when we feed 100. June wept. Not the way she'd wept alone in the kitchen the night the custody letter arrived, broken and desperate and afraid. This was different. This was the grief and relief and gratitude of a woman who had carried everything alone for so long that the act of letting someone else lift part of the weight felt like setting down a stone she'd forgotten she was holding. She reached across the table and took Duke's scarred hands in her weathered ones. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, Harlan." Duke squeezed her hands. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. The boy June had fed in 1986 and the woman who had refused his checks for 30 years sat together in a kitchen where Roy Matheson's chair was empty, but his presence was everywhere. In the vest on the hook by the door, in the clock on the wall, in the foundation that would carry his name into a future he didn't live to see. June signed the papers. 6 weeks after the incident at Rosie's diner, Carmen Avila walked into June Matheson's kitchen, saw the watercolors on the fridge, and went quiet. Ms. Rowan had brought her. She'd driven Carmen over on a Saturday morning, introducing her as "my friend from college who owns the gallery on 4th Street," and Carmen had come expecting to offer polite encouragement to a child. She was mid-40s, sharp-featured, with silver rings on every finger and the assessing gaze of a woman who had spent 20 years separating real talent from well-meaning sentiment. She wore a black turtleneck and tailored pants and statement earrings that set her apart from everything else in Cedar Falls, and she had prepared, on the drive over, exactly what she would say to be kind without being dishonest. She didn't use any of it. She stood in front of the fridge and studied each painting, the sunflowers, the heron, the morning light through the window, the storm clearing. Then she asked to see the rest. June brought out the stack from Lily's room, 24 watercolors on various paper, some on the cheap stock from the school supply closet, some on the quality sheets Ms. Rowan had given her. Carmen laid them across the kitchen table and didn't speak for a full 3 minutes. When she finally looked up, her eyes were bright. "Who taught her light like this?" "Nobody," June said. "She just paints." Carmen turned to Ms. Rowan. "You were right." She turned back to June. "I'd like to give Lily an exhibition." The show opened 3 weeks later. Carmen titled it, "Trembling Light," Lily's own words, from a Saturday morning at this very table. She curated it with genuine respect, not charity. Every painting was professionally framed and lit. The gallery on 4th Street had never been this full. The crowd was something Cedar Falls had never seen. Iron Oaks riders in leather vests, standing next to art collectors from Des Moines, teachers next to reporters, neighbors who'd been following the story for weeks, next to strangers who'd driven hours after seeing it online. Ms. Rowan stood in the front row, beaming, paint still under her fingernails. Duke stood at the back with his arms folded, and if you looked closely, his eyes were wet. Every piece sold. Every single one. Lily stood at the front of the gallery with her crutches and a microphone someone had lowered to her height. She was trembling. Not just her left hand, but all of her. The way a person trembles when they are terrified and brave at the same time. The room went still. My grandma told me beautiful things can come from shaking hands. Her voice was soft and slurred and clear. I think she was right. The room broke open. Applause, tears, the sound of 200 people who had come to see something true and found it. Then someone near the back of the gallery noticed Bryce Keller. He was standing just inside the door, alone, no friends, no phone, wearing a wrinkled hoodie and sneakers that weren't clean for once. He looked like he hadn't slept. The crowd noticed him before he was ready to be noticed. A murmur rippled through the room, heads turning, faces hardening. A woman near the door stepped away from him as if proximity were contamination. 2 Iron Oaks riders near the back unfolded their arms and squared their shoulders. Bryce didn't move. He stood there and absorbed it. The hostility, the disgust, the weight of 200 people looking at him, the way he had looked at Lily in that diner. His face was red. His jaw worked like he was trying to swallow something that wouldn't go down. He waited. The crowd didn't part for him. Nobody made room. He had to thread his way through people who turned their backs as he passed, through a silence that was different from the one in Rosie's diner. Not the silence of cowardice, but the silence of judgment. Every step cost him something. He reached Lily. She was still at the microphone, her crutches planted, Miss Rowan at her shoulder. June had moved forward from the back of the gallery, one hand reaching for Lily instinctively. Bryce opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He tried again. His voice cracked. He looked at the floor. He looked at the ceiling. He looked anywhere but at the 12-year-old girl in front of him. What I did... He stopped. His hands were shaking. Not the way Lily's shook. Not with a condition he'd been born into and never chosen. His hands shook because he was standing in the wreckage of what he'd built, and he didn't have his father or his friends or his money or a single wall left to hide behind. I'm sorry. The words came out broken and wet and small. I know it doesn't. I know that's not... He couldn't finish. He stood there with tears running down his face, 17 years old and stripped to nothing, and the room gave him exactly what he had given Lily in that diner. Nothing. Lily looked at him. She looked at him for a long time, with steady brown eyes that held no hatred and no forgiveness and no obligation to make this easier for him. She looked at him the way you look at something you've decided you're done carrying. Then she turned to her grandmother and said, "Can we go see the sunflower painting again?" June put her hand on Lily's shoulder. "Of course, baby." They walked away. Bryce stood alone in the middle of the gallery, tears on his face, surrounded by paintings made by the girl whose hand he'd slapped, whose voice he'd mocked, whose grandmother he'd shoved, and not a single person in that room moved to comfort him. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't closure. It was a 17-year-old boy standing in the consequences of his cruelty for the first time in his life, with no one to make it stop. Whether that crack would open further, whether Bryce Keller would spend years becoming a different person or spend years becoming his father, the story doesn't say. Some reckonings take longer than a single evening. Some never finish at all. Across town, in a half-empty dealership office, Doug Keller sat alone. The recall election petition lay on his desk. His phone was silent. The framed photos with the mayor and the police chief and the state legislators were still on the wall, but they looked different now, like artifacts from someone else's life. At the back of the gallery, June watched it all. Roy's leather vest was draped over her shoulders, and tears streamed down her face, and she didn't wipe them away. She watched her granddaughter walk past the boy who had tried to break her and stop in front of a painting of sunflowers and smile, and she thought about every shoe she'd tied 300 times, every Saturday morning braid, every $11 breakfast at Rosie's diner, every night she'd cried alone in the kitchen so Lily wouldn't hear. It had been enough. All of it. It had been enough. 1 year later, On a bright Saturday morning in June, 200 motorcycles lined up on Route 218 outside Cedar Falls, and the sound of their engines shook the ground. They called it the Lily Ride now. Lily Matheson, 13 years old, sat on the back of Duke's Harley with a helmet that had a sunflower painted on it. A gift from Ms. Rowan, and her arms wrapped tight around Duke's waist, and she was laughing into the wind, laughing with her whole body, the way children laugh when they've forgotten to be afraid. Behind her, 200 riders in Iron Oaks leather escorted a convoy of vans carrying disabled children to the Matheson Foundation's summer camp, a cluster of accessible cabins and an art studio and a physical therapy center built on 10 acres of donated land outside Cedar Falls. The Roy and June Matheson Foundation had been open for 9 months. In that time, 34 children had received adaptive equipment. 12 therapy scholarships had been awarded. 2 custody challenges had been fought and won for other grandparents raising disabled grandchildren, families who, like June, had been told they were too old or too poor or too alone to keep the children they loved. They weren't alone anymore. Duke rode at the front of the formation, his scarred hands steady on the handlebars, Roy's faded patch on his chest. The sidecar behind him was empty today, June's place, permanently reserved, but June had chosen to watch from the roadside this year. She said her knees couldn't take the ride, but Duke knew the truth. She wanted to see it. She wanted to stand on the shoulder of Route 218 and watch 200 motorcycles carry her granddaughter and a busload of children toward something Roy had started with a plate of meatloaf and a porch light left on. June stood at the roadside in her cardigan, Roy's leather vest over her shoulders, her silver hair pinned back, her wedding band catching the morning sun. She waved as the riders passed, a small, steady wave, the kind she gave everyone, no more and no less. Duke slowed as he reached her. He didn't stop. He raised one hand from the handlebars and held it there. A salute, a thank you, a promise kept. Lily turned on the back of the bike and waved to her grandmother with her trembling left hand, and June pressed that hand to her heart and held it there. Behind the convoy, on a side road that joined Route 218, a silver sedan moved in the opposite direction. Doug Keller drove alone, his window down, his half-empty dealership behind him. The recall election had removed him from the city council 3 months ago. The certified letter had arrived on a Tuesday, and he'd opened it with shaking hands in an office where the framed photos had already been taken down. He watched the motorcycles pass through his windshield. 200 of them. He said nothing. He drove on. Dale still ran Rosie's Diner. The regulars had started meeting his eyes again, slowly, the way a town forgives a man who is trying. He donated to the foundation every month, a small amount, quiet, listed under the diner's name. It would never erase what he'd done. But he sent it anyway, and he would keep sending it, and that was the shape of his penance. Ms. Rowan had quit her position at Cedar Falls Middle School at the end of the academic year. She now volunteered as the camp's art instructor, teaching watercolors to children whose hands shook and whose bodies didn't cooperate, and whose minds were sharper than anyone had bothered to notice. Carmen Avila had scheduled Lily's second exhibition for the fall. The convoy reached the camp. Lily climbed off Duke's Harley and grabbed her crutches and walked through the front entrance with the other children, and as she passed through the door, she looked up. Hanging on the wall of the entrance hall, in a simple wooden frame, was her first watercolor, the field of sunflowers she'd painted in June's kitchen the day the cease and desist letter arrived, the day her grandmother had pinned it to the fridge and forced a smile. It hung here now, in a place built for children like her, and the golden petals caught the light from the open door. June walked in behind her. She stopped in front of the painting. She reached out and touched the glass with her weathered fingers, and she stood there for a moment, in the entrance of the place that bore her name and Roy's, surrounded by the sound of children and motorcycles and the hum of a summer morning. June Matheson never set out to start a movement. She just fed a hungry boy one winter and raised a little girl who painted with trembling hands. But kindness, it turns out, rides loud, and it never forgets where it came from. If this story reminded you that one act of kindness can echo across a lifetime, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.